Welcome to this explainer. Look, today we're going to dismantle the toxic positivity of the self-help industry. We're replacing it with the darker, stranger, but honestly, far more authentic reality discovered by Carl Jung. If you've ever felt like your world is just completely falling apart for absolutely no reason and you are so tired of people telling you to just trust the process, well, you're exactly in the right place.
I totally get it if you instantly recoil at the phrase, everything happens for a reason. Because your pain is real, right? When you're going through genuine suffering, it doesn't feel like some beautiful, cheerful plan. It feels like absolute destruction. But look at the stark contrast between those cheap, pop culture platitudes and Jung's unsentimental truth about genuine breakdowns. He didn't believe the universe just wants you to be perfectly happy. No, he realized that your psyche actually forces necessary course corrections through really painful disruption.
Jung spent over 40 years as a psychiatrist literally watching marriages collapse, careers implode, and entire identities dissolved. And what is so incredibly fascinating about all of this is how he noticed a very purposeful direction hidden right there within the rubble. The destruction wasn't random at all. The things that broke always seemed to be the exact things that needed breaking, just to reveal who the person actually was underneath all their protective layers.
Section 1. Ego versus the self. Let's look at the core conflict of your entire life. So, the crucial first step here is distinguishing your everyday conscious identity from this massive, total entity that Jung called the self. When you say myself, you usually just mean your ego, right? The parts of you that you're aware of and, comfortable with. But the self in Jung's framework, it encompasses absolutely everything. Your conscious mind, your unconscious, your light, your shadow, plus all those experiences and qualities you've deeply buried.
And this clash of agendas is exactly why your life sometimes feels like a total catastrophe. See, your small ego has a very specific agenda: safety, control, recognition, maybe a flawless 5-year plan. But yourself, it wants something entirely different. The self wants wholeness. It's on a lifetime trajectory, and wholeness requires incorporating everything, including your failures, your wounds, and all those parts you've rejected. So when your ego's super narrow plan clashes with your self's demand for wholeness, the self is literally going to systematically dismantle the ego's plan.
We aren't talking about some external fate here, or the universe, or some mystical force directing traffic. We are talking about your own internal psyche orchestrating the destruction of a life that has simply become way too narrow for you. Your own unconscious is the architect. And guys, it's been drawing blueprints for your ultimate wholeness since before you were old enough to even know your own name.
Section 2. Why your life cracks. If the unconscious is the architect, we really need to understand how and why it decides to demolish your current structure. When we compare the ego's view to the self's message, the contrast is just incredibly revealing. When you feel anxiety, depression, or face a sudden crisis, your ego immediately interprets these as malfunctions, problems to fix or diseases to just medicate away immediately. But look at the self's message instead. Anxiety is often a glaring sign that your life contradicts your essential truth. Depression can literally be the heavy weight of an unlived life pressing down on your consciousness. Now, Jung didn't dismiss medical treatment, not at all, but he warned that blindly silencing a symptom without understanding its message is exactly like unplugging a blaring fire alarm without actually checking for the fire.
During these really intense periods of disruption, you might actually start noticing some uncanny coincidences. Jung called this synchronicity, meaningful coincidences that tend to cluster around major turning points in your life. The rational ego absolutely hates this because, well, it can't be measured. But Jung saw these synchronicities as incredibly powerful signs. They happen when your inner psychological world starts perfectly aligning with the external world, basically signaling that your old story is dying and a brand new one is fighting to emerge.
So let's ask a pretty difficult question that confronts anyone who feels trapped in a loop. Have you ever wondered why you repeatedly attract the exact same painful relationships, the same identical betrayals, or even the same career failures? Are you just unlucky? Well, Jung's answer was something he called repetition compulsion. Long before it became a clinical buzzword, Jung realized your psyche uses this to purposefully recreate a specific wound. And it's not trying to punish you. No, it is deliberately putting that wound directly in your path to force you back to the scene of an original absence. Why? So you can consciously retrieve a trapped piece of yourself that you somehow left behind. Okay, let's walk through this process step by step, because confronting a recurring wound is honestly the only way to earn your psychological freedom. First, there's the original wound, maybe an early childhood absence where love was inconsistent. Then, unconscious attraction draws you to a familiar, painful dynamic, like constantly picking emotionally unavailable partners. Step 3 is the repeated crisis, where the whole dynamic shatters once again. And finally, conscious reclamation. Facing the recurrence head-on, willingly, is the absolute only way to finally break the pattern for good.
Section 3, the principle of opposites. To truly grasp the mechanics of this internal sabotage, we have to look at an incredible concept Jung borrowed from ancient philosophy.
He called it Enantiodromia. It's this principle that everything at its extreme inevitably transforms into its exact opposite, to restore balance. And what's so fascinating about this concept is that it's basically physics applied to your psyche. Every single extreme, one-sided position your ego takes is already busy generating its own brutal, inevitable reversal.
Consider how perfectly this plays out in real life. Absolute control produces sudden chaos. Extreme rationality breeds a wild fascination with the irrational. The relentless pursuit of happiness generates deep despair. And an unyielding devotion to selflessness, it eventually triggers buried selfishness. These examples show how the unconscious perfectly compensates for an ego that has just become way too narrow, too rigid, and honestly, too disconnected from reality. It forcefully reverses course to demand wholeness.
Actually, Jung's own life serves as the perfect illustration for this. Before 1912, he was a highly successful psychiatrist strictly following Sigmund Freud's rational framework. Then, in 1912, a brutal break with Freud cost him his mentor and his entire professional community. His ego certainly did not want this. But post-1912, this devastating professional breakdown was the exact Enantiodromia required for him to descend into the unconscious and birth his actual life's work, including the brilliant discovery of archetypes and the self.
Let's pivot for a second and look outward. I want you to ask yourself a very serious question right now. Who in your life is currently carrying your unlived potential? Because the self doesn't just work inside your head, it works heavily through the specific people around you. Section 4. Mirrors of your unconscious. Let's explore how every single person who deeply impacts you is actually a precisely chosen medium for your own personal growth.
Jung called this mechanism projection. It's basically the act of outsourcing and seeing your own unintegrated capacities, your true potential, or your shadow reflected in another person. So when you feel this overwhelming, almost magical connection to someone, Jung would say you aren't just seeing them, you're actually projecting a huge piece of your own unlived potential right onto them.
The dynamics of projection follow a really clear pattern. The person you constantly idealize, they're mirroring your own unlived potential. The person who endlessly infuriates you, they're reflecting your disowned, unacceptable shadow qualities that you absolutely refuse to look at. And the one you simply can't let go of, they are holding a capacity you haven't yet learned to hold for yourself. So the crucial takeaway here is that when a significant relationship ends, that immense grief is actually an invitation. It's an invitation to finally stop outsourcing these qualities and start owning them yourself.
Section 5. Listening to the disruption. Because knowing all this intellectually is completely useless if you don't actually change how you react when the ground opens up beneath you. There's a stark difference in how we can respond to all this. Most of us just default to silencing the alarm. We rush to fix, medicate, or bypass the pain entirely. We frantically try to rebuild the exact same false life that literally just collapsed. But instead of doing that, Jung strongly urges us to use active imagination. This means just sitting with the image or the emotion, not analyzing it to death, but actually dialoguing directly with the unconscious to listen to what the disruption is trying to communicate to you.
Jung firmly believed the psyche is inherently purposeful, very much like an acorn. Think about it. An acorn already contains the mighty oak tree. It just needs soil, water, and the willingness to physically crack open in order to become what it already is. Becoming who you actually are is going to cost you the false identity you built for protection. But just like that cracked acorn, the destruction is the absolute only way your true pattern can grow. I'll leave you with this provocative thought to deeply consider as we wrap up this explainer. What is growing in the quiet space where your old life used to be? Seriously, every heartbreak, every failure, and every loss you barely survived, it wasn't a random punishment. It was your psyche aggressively composting your old life to feed the real you that was growing underground all along.
Stop trying to rebuild the structures your psyche keeps pulling down. Pay attention to what's emerging from the wreckage. Thanks for joining me today, and keep exploring.